In 1935, a Mongol Prime Minister stood up to Joseph Stalin like no other politician ever had, by slapping him across the face. Who was the brave man that faced Stalin? Why did he slap the absolute ruler of the Soviet Union? And finally, what was the context behind the interaction? Genden Peljidiin was a Mongolian communist politician who rose to prominence during the anarchic era of Mongolia during the 1920s. He was born sometime between 1892 and 1895 in what was then part of Qing China in modern-day Mongolia. Unfortunately, not much is known about his early life. We do know that he was born to a family of cattle herders, a lifestyle which was extremely widespread during this time period of Mongolia. In 1922, Genden joined the Mongolian Revolutionary Youth Wing, the youth party of the Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party. It's important to note that Mongolia had a successful communist revolution just 1 year prior to Genden's joining of the party. This event was called the Mongolian Revolution of 1921, which was essentially a three-way conflict between the Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party, who was supported by the Soviet Union, the Bogd Khanate of Mongolia, supported by Baron Roman von Ungern-Sternberg's contingent of the White Army, and finally, the Anhui Chinese warlord clique, supported by the Japanese Empire. The Soviets were hoping to dislodge von Ungern-Sternberg's leadership and troops from Mongolian lands, while hoping to establish a communist state there. The White Russians were hoping to continue to use Mongolia as a base to attack communist forces. Finally, the Japanese wanted a weak Republic of China to essentially control Mongolia to make a future Japanese occupation of the region easier. The revolution was a victory for the Mongol communists and the Red Army. They succeeded in ending the 2-year Republic of China occupation of Outer Mongolia in 1921. They decisively defeated the forces of Baron Roman von Ungern-Sternberg, and he was executed later that year. Despite the Bogd Khan being defeated in battle, the communists couldn't simply dethrone and kill him. As much like Tibet, the Bogd Khan was also the chief lama of Mongolia, similar in vein to the Dalai Lama. This meant that he was a revered religious figure. Thus, the communists took control of the government, but allowed Bogd Khan to retain a token amount of power until his death in 1924. Following the death of Bogd Khan, the Mongolian People's Republic was established, making it the first communist state fully in Asia. That same year, Genden attended the first session of the Mongolian Great Khural, their legislature, and was noticed by then Prime Minister Ungern-Sternberg for his outspokenness. As a result, the PM appointed Genden as chairman of the Presidium of the State Little Khural, essentially making Genden de facto head of state. Genden was also appointed to serve as the chairman of the Central Bureau of Mongolian Trade Unions. He spearheaded rapid socialist collectivization reforms, which resulted in the execution of 700 noblemen and the confiscation of 800 properties belonging to nobility and Buddhist monasteries. The socialist collective farms failed utterly, and the confiscation of property resulted in the death of 1/3 of Mongolia's livestock. Unsurprisingly, a revolt broke out immediately after the failures, known as the Kuvsgul Uprising. The rebellion was led by Buddhist clergy who saw socialist reforms as Soviet interference in Mongol affairs. They were joined by much of the country's herdsmen and even saw some low-level communist officials. The rebellion was crushed after only 6 months in October of 1932, resulting in numerous massacres and kangaroo court executions. In response, Mongol leftist leaders were purged by Stalin for anti-revolutionary behavior, due to them being quote-unquote enacting socialist measures prematurely. Genden saved his position in government by rushing to meet with Stalin personally and winning his favor. Stalin would appoint Genden as chairman of the Assembly of People's Commissaries, making him head of Mongolia's new economic transition. Genden implemented an economic policy similar to Lenin's quote-unquote new economic policy. He lowered taxes, loosened business regulations, and allowed for the reintegration of Mongolia's Buddhist clergy. It would be this final point that would serve as the impetus for further issues with Stalin. By 1934, the amicable personal relationship between Genden and Stalin began to deteriorate. At a meeting in early 1934, Stalin urged Genden to exterminate Mongolia's 100,000 Buddhist lamas and refer to them as, quote, enemies within. Genden had stated in 1933 that he was not going to wage a war on religion, and was himself known to be a staunch Buddhist. He was quoted saying, "On Earth, there are two great geniuses, Buddha and Lenin." Genden ultimately ignored Stalin's order of exterminating the lamas of Mongolia and left the meeting feeling suspicious of the Soviets. That same year, Genden went as far as not renewing the protection treaty that the Soviets had with Mongolia, protecting the latter from foreign invasion. He also stalled the 1936 Friendship Treaty with the Soviets, taking away their right to station troops in Mongolia. The tension between Stalin and Genden hit a boiling point in December of 1935, when Genden was summoned to Moscow at Stalin's orders. Stalin admonished Genden for refusing to act on his orders to exterminate the Buddhist lamas of Mongolia. Shortly after, at a Mongolian embassy reception in Moscow, an intoxicated Genden publicly berated Stalin, saying, quote, "You bloody Georgian, you have become a virtual Russian czar." Some have suggested that Genden followed up, saying that, quote, "If Stalin can be czar, why can't Genden be Khan?" Genden then shockingly slapped Stalin across the face, breaking Stalin's famous smoking pipe. After the slap, he publicly told Stalin that he was considering an alliance with the Japanese Empire. Upon Genden's return to Mongolia in March of 1936, his main political rival, Korlagin Choibalsan, with the support of Stalin, ousted Genden from all political appointments and placed Genden under house arrest. Choibalsan would take Genden's position as de facto ruler of Mongolia with the blessing of Joseph Stalin. Genden was then invited, along with his family, to reside in the Soviet Union for medical care in April of 1936. He spent 1 year with his family, essentially in exile, at the Black Sea resort town of Foros. In the summer of 1937, Genden was arrested during Stalin's Great Purge. Under fierce interrogation, he admitted to plotting with, quote, reactionary lamas and the Japanese, with the aim of attempting a coup. He was executed in Moscow on November 26, 1937. The Mongolian government declared Genden a non-person upon his death, but he would later be rehabilitated by the Soviets in 1956. His story and brave stand against Stalin would fall into historical obscurity until the collapse of Mongolia's communist government in 1990. In 1993, Genden's daughter Surendalam opened the Memorial Museum for Victims of Political Repression in Genden's former home. The museum remains open today in Mongolia's capital of Ulaanbaatar, and it received renovations in 2018 and 2019. Today, Genden is largely seen as a positive figure who stood up for his country's sovereignty and Buddhist faith. Thanks for watching, and I wanted to thank everyone for getting Uranium City to 100,000 views and getting me to become a YouTube partner. Please stay tuned for a short later this month.